Hello, fellow homeschool moms. Today we're going to talk about the power of words, how to build character through literature and writing. So I hope you're in the right place. We're going to talk about some great literature today. So you may be wondering, who am I? My name is Deshelle McVeigh, and I'm the founder of Hide the Chocolate, where I help parents by giving them the tools to make their homes and their children's education enchanting or fun. But I'm also the owner of Literary Adventures for Kids. And this is where we help parents and students to really dig deep into books, to go onto rabbit trails and add a little adventure. I'm also a real world homeschool mama who has been doing this for a very long time. I have three wonderful children. One is a senior in high school, one is a junior in college, and one is an adult making his way in the world now. I have over 20 years of experience teaching in traditional and non-traditional settings, and I still teach today. I have classes that I teach online. I just finished up my last class that is in person, moving more to online classes, and I'm really enjoying it. I love teaching. So that's one of my favorite things about owning a literature company is I get to talk about books all day to kids. And that's why I'm going to be talking about the power of words, building character through literature and writing, because this is what I literally do every day is I talk to kids about literature and I talk to kids about writing. I do that through poetry. I do that through classic literature. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I want to just give you some simple tips, just three actually, that you can use with almost any book you have, probably tons of them already in your library right now. So this isn't going to be about adding more to your plate, okay? This is about seeing what you already have and going from there. So, tip number one we're going to talk about is great books teach character and leadership. We're in a leadership conference right now. And so, this is why we're talking about how we can teach these traits through a book. Number two, we're going to talk about discussion and how it helps kids decide where they stand on issues. And three, we're going to talk about how writing helps kids to express their beliefs clearly. And I think that's one of the most important things we can teach our kids is how to express themselves clearly. Okay, we do not have to hunt for character lessons. Good stories bring them to us. Like it says up here, stories are where kids practice moral decision making. Stories allow kids to explore right and wrong without the pressure of personal failure. So when your kids are reading about characters and those characters are making hard choices, that your kids are practicing that type of moral thinking without the pressure of it being personal. So they're not stuck in a situation that they have to come up with, how do I deal with this? They're reading about the situation. They're reading about how this character handled it. And then they can kind of analyze, did that character handle it well or did they handle it poorly? And these can be any type of books, from the simplest books to the hardest books, the classic literature, anything. We can use these books to study characters. And these stories give kids some emotional distance. So they can look at a book and a character and they say, well, I disagree with that character, before they ever have to look at mom or dad and say, well, I disagree with you. And trust me, they're going to disagree with you. Not everybody comes out a little clone of you and your spouse. So these children need to learn how to grow and to be themselves. And I think this is a very, very important role as parents that we have, is not trying to indoctrinate our children with our belief system by saying, this is the belief system and this is what we always believe. And there are no gray areas and there's no times that it ever changes. We want them to develop these beliefs as their own. And how we do that is let them walk through how they would handle a situation. We're probably going to get I'm going to get a little too deep right here, but I think it's really important that kids learn what they believe early in age and start questioning even what you believe to see how it fits into their worldview. And I know that seems a little scary as parents. We're like, wait a minute, they may choose to believe differently than I do. And that's absolutely something that might happen. But I think it's important that you can address these situations as they're younger. So when they start questioning, well, I don't know why you believe that, mom, or I don't know why you believe that, dad, and I don't want to believe that way because my friend says so and so. This is when they're young. You can start saying, okay, well, I'm not telling you to believe this because I believe this. I'm telling you to believe this because of these reasons. And you give them the reasons, the clarifying reasons. One of the things my husband likes to say, and I can say this because we're in a religious conference, is that you have to make God your God. You can't just have my God. And he just says it much more eloquently than that, I assure you. But it's important that kids realize that their belief systems have to be their belief systems. They can't just adopt your belief systems. And you want to train them in the right way. You want to give them the right arguments, the right defenses, but you want to do that in a way so they understand why they believe something, not believe something just because. And literature gives us this wonderful way to start discussing these things and really dig into why do we believe something and is that a right or wrong belief? Okay, so I'm not just going to say that and then not give you some examples, right? That wouldn't be very nice of me. So, we're going to talk about a few of these stories that you've probably all heard of, and if you haven't, I'm going to give a little synopsis of it so you can understand where I'm coming from. But the first one, I'm sure most of you have heard of Charlotte's Web. This is a great way to start in with your early elementary kids, and we all know the story of what Charlotte does for Wilbur. So Charlotte sees that Wilbur's life matters, even when no one else is willing to step in. So she uses her words, you know how she makes them into her web, to protect Wilbur. She knows it's going to cost her her time. She knows it's going to cost her her energy. And ultimately, it costs Charlotte her life. So this can open up conversations about quiet leadership, loyalty, and choosing to act when no one else seems to be watching. This book, in my personal belief, is the ultimate story of friendship. Now, it's going to touch on some sensitive issues, and one of those is how do we treat all of God's creatures? And this is a great time when we can talk about, do we believe that all of God's creatures need to be treated in a certain way? And how do they need to be treated? With respect. And I think that's an important thing to talk about with kids because sometimes we just have this idea they just know how we feel about things, and they don't. They're not born with innate thoughts about how we treat other creatures on this earth. And I say creatures, but this can also lend to obviously humans as well. So this is a great story to start young with early elementary. I'm sure you can think of other stories. This is just one I figured most people knew. Okay. The next one is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So this is more for upper elementary through middle school. I know most of you probably already know that this one is an allegory for the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus. But beyond that, we can see some other things that we can use to talk about character. And one of those is using Edmund as a wonderful teaching example. So Edmund makes some choices. He's the brother, and he makes choices driven by, honestly, selfishness, some resentment. He's got some attitude, let's just say. And he betrays his siblings for a short-term gain. It seems silly in the story, but I know that you can see how this can be extrapolated into bigger issues. And we've all seen people that have betrayed us or our friends or our family for what we think are just honestly ridiculous reasons. And so this story allows kids to talk about consequences. It also allows us to talk about regret and then eventually forgiveness. It also helps us to talk about this idea that bad choices don't have to define us forever. So Edmund makes some horrifyingly bad choices, but he's able to get forgiveness for those choices and he's able to change his life. And I think that's a really important thing that we don't always press upon the wrong things, and the consequences of that, but we also show the forgiveness and show how we can be redeemed. The next one is a classic that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. At least I've heard it if you haven't read it. So this is To Kill a Mockingbird, and this is great for high school age. Get a drink here. Got a little bit of a cold today. So this story is about Atticus Finch, who is a lawyer, And he chooses to defend Tom Robinson, who is accused of falsely of sexual assault, to put it mildly. And it's because he is of a different color than the accuser. So he chooses to do this even when he knows it's going to make him very unpopular in his home. So this is in Alabama. And this is going to put his family at great risk because he's choosing to represent someone who everyone just assumes is in the wrong, even though he's actually innocent. So this is going to create some space to talk about being courageous and having moral courageousness. It's going to give you a chance to talk about justice and what it looks like to do the right thing when it's the hard thing to do. But also, it's going to bring up some very sensitive issues. One of those being sexual assault, obviously. Another being racism. Another being about how a lot of times we interpret things as being saviors, and that maybe some people are not necessarily saviors. They're just doing their job. And so it's a way for us to really look at those type of things and talk to them. If you have friends or family members who are of different races than you, this is a wonderful time to talk about that. And that really, when we did this in our homeschool, I did speak a lot to some of my African American friends and how they dealt with this book in high school when they read it, and it was very eye-opening. It took a different spin on the how way I had always looked at it. So I encourage you to do that with this book. The next one is The Giver. This is another good high school book. I know that a lot of times in public school system we'll see this for middle school, and I guess if you have a mature middle schooler, I think that's fine. It doesn't have anything untoward, but it does have some very serious topics that I believe are probably more of a high school level to really think deeply about. So if you don't know, Jonas lives in this world that is built on comfort and sameness, and where everyone needs to conform. And if they don't conform, they are released, which we kind of know what that means. But it's said so nicely, like they're just released. But it's yeah, what you think. But anyway, as Jonas is going through this, in long story, I'm not going to fill you in. I'm going to make it short. But he starts to realize that there's some truth here. And one of the things is they don't have memories, and he's getting these memories, and he's starting to realize that freedom really does matter more than just doing what's easy. And so this is a really good one where kids can wrestle with the questions of just blind obedience and conformity, just for conformity, doing what's safe versus what is right, and what does freedom mean to you. Being safe isn't always the best choice, even though that's a hard topic. And that's one of the reasons why I say it's not a good younger kid topic, because we want them to feel the safety at their younger ages. But as they're getting older, they'll start questioning things. And that's when you want to say, when is it worth your safety? What is that cost of that freedom? Now, obviously, I'm going to give an easy one, A Christmas Carol. I'm pretty sure most of you, if you have not read the book, you've seen at least one of the versions of plays or musicals or just stories. But you know Scrooge, and he's forced to face the consequences of his choices and the trajectory of his current life and how it's going. And so shows transformation. So it's going to help kids to see growth, repentance, and how you can change at any stage, even when you've made a lot of mistakes and your life is not where you want it to be. So all these are just examples that I wanted you to kind of see how you can really talk about different subjects in different areas. We're going to dig a little deeper in a minute, but once kids notice these moments in these stories, what we're going to do next is give them space to think about them aloud. So they're going to see these. I know you think they're just going to read through this and not catch on these, but they do catch on these things. I recently taught the Nutcracker, and if you've ever read the Nutcracker actual story, E.T.A. Hoffman's version, and then there's the Dumas version that's a little bit better, but E.T.A. Hoffman, he's a horror story writer, and German writer 200 years ago, and he wrote a kind of horrifying story that got turned into a wonderful ballet. But as the kids were reading it, I was wondering about things that I was catching as I was reading as an adult woman, and thinking, ooh, I don't like that. I don't like what he wrote about that. Maybe 200 years ago that was okay, but that is not okay today. And I didn't say anything just to see how far. And the kids started pulling it out. I was like, wait a minute, Mr. Shaw, I didn't like this. I didn't like that. And I had to say, yeah, I agree with that. This is a great story that got turned into a great ballet. However, yeah, it's got some issues in it. So the kids will notice them. But now we're going to we're going to kind of transition into tip number 2 here. And that is where this is where parents get nervous, especially when books bring up really sensitive topics. And that is completely okay. Because discussion doesn't mean we're telling our kids what to believe. It means we're helping them to think through it, okay? The story is already holding the tension. We're not having to create that. We're going to let the story do the heavy lifting for us. This way, again, like I said earlier, the kids are not going to have to say, I disagree with you, Mom, or I disagree with you, Dad. They're going to have to say, I disagree with this character, or I agree with this character. Okay? So let's talk about how this works out in real life. I said I was going to dig in deeper in a minute, and this is the minute. So right now I'm teaching, and I teach classes, online classes, every month, several times a month. And right now we're going through world literature. So we do various different series each year, and this year we're doing world literature. And several things have come up because we've read in our elementary middle school, we read the book Inside Out and Back Again, which is about a Vietnamese refugee family who moved to Alabama, based on a true story by the author. This was back during the Vietnam War when Saigon was being captured. And I'm sure if any of you have seen the play Miss Saigon, the musical Miss Saigon, you've lived through that or know anything about the Vietnam War. It was pretty horrific, but there was a lot of people who did escape Vietnam and came to the U.S. And so that is about her story. We also read in the high school Refugee, which is a really cool book that talks about 3 different types of refugees. One being the Jews who were refugees from the Holocaust, and how Cuba wouldn't take them, and they came over to the U.S., and the U.S. refused to take any of the refugees and sent them back to Germany, and how most of them did die, even if they were accepted back in Britain and France. But as we all know, France was eventually taken over by the Nazis too. So a lot of those Germans were sent back to concentration camps. So, and then one of the stories was about Cuba and the refugees leaving Cuba. And another one was about refugees from Syria. And it shows all these children and their stories and their families, how they're leaving these places, not because they want to. This is where their families are. This is where they've grown up. This is their countries that they love. But for whatever reason, somebody's taken over this country and is doing horrifying things to hurt people. And so they have to leave, and how they left. And it was really cool how it all comes together at the end. I will not tell you that. But the point of this is, because we had these stories to read, we were able to discuss displacement. Refugees, sometimes they're internally displaced, sometimes they're externally displaced, but all of ours were externally displaced. And we get to talk about the fear of these. Why would you leave where you love and where you want to be? It has to take something horrific for you to leave that. And the resilience they had to just keep going. And these stories allow our children to explore compassion and the complexity of an immigration issue that's not reduced to little memes and little talking points on the headlines, but really digs in and understands what the story is about. And it helps us talk about something that is such a big, important thing in a way that the kids can understand, because they're seeing it in the characters. And they can agree or disagree with them, but you're getting to talk about that with them. Another really sensitive topic that is hard for parents to talk about with their children, other than preaching to them, is abortion. And we have seen that in 2 different books, actually, we've come across that have really opened our thinking process to how we see this. And so the first one, my daughter and her friends, when I was teaching her homeschool group, a lot of kids there, was Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress. And please forgive me for my pronunciation of his name, but I'm not French. So we in that story, there is a girl that is in China during the a period in the 1970s when, well, everything is moving into what China is like now, but it was pretty horrific how people were treated. And it goes through this whole story, and this character, it's not a huge part of the story. It's just a little tiny part of the story. But it was a great catalyst for discuss abortion and why someone would choose to do that. And the really great thing for us was at the time, this was parallel to when Roe versus Wade was being overturned in the Supreme Court. So it was all over the news and everybody was talking about it, and there was people yelling on both sides. And we were able to discuss that very specific topic that was very much in the news in a very specific example of a certain character. And did we think she made the right choice? Did we think she made the wrong choice? What other choices could she have made? In the book Unwind that we read a couple years later, it opened that door again because it is literally based on how the a battle, assuming, and this was written several years ago, so it was before any recent things, but how a battle between the pro-life and when they win the war, let's say, it turns into an actual war, and how they end the war and how they decide to make things work. I'm trying really hard not to say like what the story's about by giving you this. So sorry that sounds really choppy. But that opened that door so we could talk about, wow, what does it mean to be alive? And what does it mean to give your life for something? And, you know, how important is life? And what does being pro-life actually mean? So these books gave us a shared language, and it gave us a little bit of a distance because we weren't talking about somebody's friend. We weren't talking about them, my daughter having to deal with any of these situations, thank God, but we were talking about a character. So I didn't start with opinions when I discussed this with their students. I was starting with characters. What choice did this character make? And what were the consequences? Because there's always consequences, right? Right or wrong. You make a decision, there's always consequences, and you have to learn to live with them. And that's why you always want to make a decision that has the consequences you can live with. And I think that's really important to talk to the teens about. Another book, and I encourage you to sit down with your teen and read this book at some point, because I do live with a pediatrician, and he has talked with me several times about how much depression he is seeing, how much more depression and anxiety he sees these days than he ever did. And this book is called Speak. It is also based on a true story. So most of these books are based on true stories. That makes it so much fun, doesn't it? But the author was talking about a situation that happened to her. And again, this is about an assault, but that is not the point of the story. The point of the story is about depression, and you can have conversations about silence and isolation and how important it is to find your voice. The teenagers need that ability to find their voice. And I think this is such an important topic. And here, literature is going to allow us to talk to teens about this really heavy topic. All these topics that are really heavy, by talking about what did the character do? Do we agree with what they did? Do we disagree with what they did? What would we have done differently? So how do we start these discussions, okay? Because books let us explore these hard issues before that kids have to face them personally. And let me tell you, I know you're going to think that some of the topics I just mentioned, my kids aren't going to face that, but they are. It may not be them. I will tell you, like I said, I have 3 children ranging from high school all the way through adulthood. And my children have dealt with a lot of these topics, not necessarily because it personally affects them, but because they had friends who had personally affected, and their friends came to them, and they needed to know how to talk to them. So what we want to do is when we start talking about these discussions is we want to hear some ideas of how you want to talk about it. First, we want to just ask, hey, what happened in the story? let them tell us what happened. You're supposed to be reading these stories along with them, right? You need to know, right? But even if you haven't read the story and your kid just comes in and goes, man, I just read this story and wow, what happened in the story? And they tell you, before you react, try your hardest. And this is the hardest part. Don't make your faces. Don't go, well, that's just wrong. Don't. I want you to stop and calmly ask your student, even if, and I found this is a good trick, especially when you get teenagers, be doing something else. Be cooking. I dropped my water. Be cooking. Be typing on your computer. Be writing. Be doing something else so that he gives you space to think and not be looking straight at them and giving them an answer. Plus, teens don't necessarily want to be face to face with you with these heavy questions. A lot of times they're going to bring them up while you're driving in the car because you have to look at the road. And they're going to start talking, and they know that you can't just turn around and look at them the whole time. So that's why they bring all these questions up. But I found that works a lot better. So ask them, why do you think the character chose to do that? Don't give them the answer. You want them to come up with the answer on their own. That doesn't mean we're not guiding. We're always guiding. That's what we do as parents, right? We guide our students. We guide our kids. We want them to see the beliefs that we believe and we think are important. We're obviously raising our children to have good lives and what we think would make good lives. So obviously, we want to instill our belief system in them. We also want to instill where we made mistakes, because we all did, right? I mean, the stuff that I did as a teenager, and I'm thinking, oh, thank goodness there wasn't social media back then. I did not need that. But just the dumbest mistakes I did, and the times I had to pray to God and say, oh, please get me through this one, because what have I stepped into this time? So we want them to make choices. And the way we can do that by making good choices is by helping them walk through those choices before they actually have to face them. So when the character does something, you say, well, what would you have done? How would you have chosen to do this differently? And why would you have done that differently? And you can lead them in that, because when they say, oh, well, I would have blah, 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 and they give you some answer that's totally ridiculous and you know it never work in real life, then you say, okay, well, that's interesting, but then what if that happened? Or what if this happened? Or what if the consequences are this and this and this? Like, you may have done this, but that's illegal. You can't even do that. You're going to go to jail if you do that. So let's think through that. I mean, that's not a good way to handle that situation. Or this is going to cause this kind of problem. And you can talk to them. So even after our discussions, we're talking and talking. You want to offer that space so the kids can sort out what they're believing. So they're talking it out, but you want them to really think about privately, what are they really believing? And that's where the writing part comes in. Okay? So writing is how kids learn what they think. Right here, we're not talking about grammar or length here. This is just, we want to get clarity, okay? Many kids know what they think. Well, let me rephrase it. They don't know what they think until they start writing it out. So writing helps our kids move from the emotional reactions of, that character did whatever, I can't believe they did that, to actually thinking, why did the character do that? Let's think about, why did they make that choice? So here's some easy writing prompts that you can use. You simply say, write about a choice the character made that you agree with or disagree with. Explain why. Okay? Any book, you can do that. Write from a character's point of view at the moment they had to decide what to do. Write about a value that mattered most to you in the story and whether it matters in the story and whether it mattered to you. And what would you have done differently if you were in the character's place? And that's an important one, because we can see what happens to the character if they made a right or wrong choice. What would you have done differently to make this situation better? When we put all this together, we get something really, really powerful. Because remember, the story is already holding the tension. We're just inviting the kids into this story. We want to ask these discussion questions really calmly. We don't want to correct or steer. We want to really just say, hey, this is what we're going to, and then we're going to have them write about it, okay? The discussion part isn't about getting it right. It's about thinking it out loud. So here, we've got that discussion part where we're getting the curiosity going and they don't have to get it right. And now we're getting to the writing part where they're really kind of clarifying how they feel. Okay, this doesn't have to be long. Honestly, 5 minutes writing is enough. So we're going to read the book, we're going to discuss the book, and we're going to write about 5 minutes. I'm going to give you a little heads up. I have 2 free journals. They're not normally free, but I'm going to give them to you free. You can go to highchocolate.com/bravery journal, or howthechocolate.com/teen journal. And those are going to give you two options for journals. The teen one is our Finding Your Voice journal. It's 5 minutes a day journaling for teens. I actually wrote it to go along with our Speak book club to really work with kids with anxiety and depression. And let me tell you, they're all going to go through some anxiety and depression, all of them, even your happiest kid. And for the younger kids, we have the Bravery Journal that's going to unlock kind of your child's inner courage. And that's, for maybe elementary age, things like that, to really help you with that. Remember, you're not teaching kids to persuade aggressively. We want them to be able to write out how they're thinking because we want them to be able to clarify their thoughts. When they're having a discussion with someone else, we don't want them just screaming thoughts at them. Well, you're wrong. You're right. Blah, 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 blah. No, we want them to be able to think clearly. We want them to be able to express their convictions thoughtfully. Okay? If you're having a discussion with somebody and they're screaming yes or no or ultimatums at you, you're not going to listen to them. You need them to express themselves with thoughtfulness. And you're going to listen to somebody and you're going to have a thoughtful discussion when they can talk clearly to you and when they can communicate with empathy, words. That's important, to be empathetic of others. Yeah, I understand this is a right situation. This is a wrong situation. I understand how you got yourself into the wrong situation. You didn't have a clear way out of that. I empathize with you. I understand. I feel your pain. Let me help you. Instead of yelling at people that they did something wrong, remember back the redemption and how we can help them through it. Okay. These are 3 simple ideas, but they're really actually very, very powerful. So remember, stories raise the questions, discussion explores these questions, and writing clarifies them so they can express their convictions clearly. You do not need to do this perfectly for this to work, for this to matter. You just have to do it, and you have to commit yourself to doing it. And I'm not saying every book you need to dig deep into some moral issue, but every book you should figure out what learning can you get from that book as the kids are reading. Okay, if you'd like a little support in this, I'm totally available to help. You can find me at all these places on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, Literary Adventures for Kids, Hide the Chocolate at both Instagram and Facebook, and Hide the Chocolate on TikTok and YouTube. If you want to, grab one of my free courses. You can scan that right there. Or you can go to Literary Adventures for Kids -P-free courses, or hidethechocolate-free.org. hidethechocolate.com/free. And you can get a free course and kind of see what I'm talking about. Now, we do not do our critical thinking questions in the younger book clubs. I leave that for parents to discuss. But in the high school books, we will have what we call our questions to ponder, which are critical thinking questions there. Remember, you're already doing important work just by reading and talking with your kids. And I know you are, because you're here. You want to know more. You're not just letting a book do it for you. You're actually wanting to know how to help your kids. Words are very powerful. They shape how our kids think, and the stories from those words give them a place to practice becoming who they're going to be. So, have a great time with your next book. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at Deshelle@hidethechocolate.com. Have a good day.